friends, it's time to get started on our job. One of the first things you want to do is safely raise and support the rear of the vehicle so the wheels are off the ground. After that, we're going to remove all 5 of our 19mm lug nuts and then the wheel. Now that the wheel's off of there, let's continue on by removing the caliper from the bracket. You're going to find 2 13mm headed slider bolts for this. There's one right here, and then you can go ahead and follow it up to the other one. Let's just go ahead and loosen up the first one. Sometimes you might happen to notice that the slider itself wants to spin when you're doing this. You can generally just hold that still either by hand or with some pliers. I'll leave that in there a couple threads, move up and do the same to the other. Let's go ahead and remove the pair. Inspect these, set them aside. Let's continue on using a nice pry bar here. We're going to carefully get in between this area and gently start separating it from the caliper bracket. Once you have your caliper off of there, you want to pay attention to the area with the piston. You want to make sure you don't see any fluid. If you do, it's probably brake fluid, in which case you'd have to replace the caliper. This one looks okay, so I'll set it aside. Now the next thing that we're going to do is go ahead and push in this piston. Most calipers, typically you can just go ahead and squeeze on it and it's going to force right in. On these particular type of calipers that have the emergency brake attached to them, you're going to find that they have 2 slots. One of them is going to look like this and the other one's going to be located a little further than that. Essentially what we're going to have to do is stick a tool inside here, start pressing this in. At the same time, we're going to be rotating it clockwise to push it into its fully inward position. The tool I'm going to use for this looks just like that. You can see that it has 2 little pitons. Essentially, I'm just going to go ahead and fit those right into where they belong. I'm going to press in and turn it clockwise. It might also be helpful if you keep your caliper in this position right here. I just kind of put the bolt in there temporarily. All right. So now I'm just going to line up these tabs so they're pretty much straight up and down again once this is fully pushed in. Now we can move along to removing our pads from the bracket. Next we can move along to removing our 18mm caliper bracket bolts. There's one right here and one located just above it. Let's go ahead and start removing the first one. We're going to leave it in there just a few threads and then we'll fully remove the second one before fully removing the first. Remove your caliper bracket. Next, let's remove the rotor. Sometimes you have to give it a couple loving bonks with a hammer just to break it free. Just be very careful not to damage any of your lug studs. Now the next thing that you would want to do is go ahead and clean up your hub mating surface along here. This one's actually pretty clean. It just has some copper never sees on it. But if it looks like this one right there, just use a nice sanding disc and make sure it's clean and free of any debris. Let's grab our rotor. Slide it right on here. Now at this point I always use one of our lug nuts. I'm just going to go ahead and put this on here to bottom it out. That's essentially going to make sure that this rotor can't move around on us while we continue. Alright, now it's going to be time to get ready to start taking care of our caliper bracket. The first thing that I always like to do is remove my caliper sliders. That's this area right here. Go ahead and hold on to that boot. We're going to give this a little twist to try to break it free. Sometimes you just have to use a screwdriver or whatever you might happen to have just to break the seal. Pull that out of there. Just going to inspect it real quick. Obviously, you would do the same to the other one. This one just came out. Now the next thing that I always do is just go ahead and remove the boot from the area as well. For this, I'm just going to grab onto it. Once you have the boot off of there, we're just going to give it a little squeeze. You want to thoroughly inspect it. Make sure it's not torn or worn or extremely stiff. This one's still nice and soft and pliable and it doesn't look like it's damaged. We'll go ahead and do the same to the other one. We can set those aside. Now let's move along to the caliper bracket tins. That's this area inside here. To remove these, generally I just use a small pry bar. I'm going to carefully give it a little bonk. Just shoot them right off of there. The next thing we're going to continue on is to cleaning out the caliper slider ports. That's this area along here. Typically, I just use a little bit of parts cleaner. We'll just gently spray some in here, being very careful not to get any in our eyes. After that, you want to use a bore brush. Essentially looks just like this. Put it right in the hole. And we'll just go ahead and clean out any dirt or debris that might be inside this area. Let's go ahead and dump that into a collection receptacle. We'll give it a little rinse. Inspect the hole, make sure it's clean. Assuming it looks good, we'll move along and do the same to the other side. Once you have the inside of the ports cleaned up, let's move along to this portion right along here. This is essentially where that boot's supposed to ride, so you want to make sure it's clean and free of any debris or rust or anything the like. Essentially, anything that you have on there could make it so the boot's not going to have a good seal, and moisture might make its way inside, which is going to seize up this area. Double check them both, and we'll move along. Now, once we have that cleaned up, let's move along to these four corners right along here. You're going to have four of these areas. The areas that you want to clean is along this edge, right along here, this edge along there, and then right along here. Do the same on all four corners. All right, so I cleaned up all four corners on this caliper bracket. Now let's go ahead and grab a little bit of caliper grease. We'll apply a little bit of lubricant in this area and then put on some brand new tins. Now when you look at these tins, you're going to see some differences on them. You're going to have one edge that comes down quite a bit further than the top edge that you can see along here. And then also if you were to look along the back, you can see that you have the extended clip and you have the shorter clip. The area with the extended clip needs to be facing out and away from the rotor. At this point, I'm going to go ahead and take this one. We have the longer end along the bottom area and the extended clip along the back side. Let's go ahead and take this, slide it in. Listen for a click, give it a little tug just to make sure it's secure, and then do the same on all the rest. Now it's going to be time to take care of our slider pins. The areas that you want to pay attention to is the shaft area here, which of course is going to go in and out of the slider port, and then all up along this area as well. You want to make sure you clean out this edge along here, which is where that boot's going to ride. Now that I have my caliper slider pins cleaned up, I'm going to continue on with some high temperature caliper grease. We're just going to go ahead and grease this entire shaft. After that, you want to, of course, make sure you make your way up inside this grooved area here. That's going to help keep moisture away. Once I have that lubricated, I'm also going to take some more, and I'm going to come right along the port that I'm going to be applying it to. We want to try to just get a little bit inside, and then generally a little bit along the outside, once again inside that groove to help keep the moisture out of the area. Now we can go ahead and take our caliper slider boot. We're going to slide this right onto the caliper slider and put it into position. After that, give it a little spin to work in that grease. Now let's go ahead and put it right in here. Slide it in. Give it a little wiggle to make sure it's in there. Give it a little tug to make sure it's secure. This one feels good. Do the same to the other. Now it's time to install the caliper bracket on here. Let's go ahead and slide it into position. We'll take both of our caliper bracket bolts. We're going to start these in, snug them up, and then we're going to torque each of them to 74 foot-pounds. Now it's going to be time to get ready to install our brake pads. What you want to pay attention to when you're looking at all four of the pads is you're going to find two of them that have these wear indicators on them. Now the one with the wear indicator is supposed to be the inboard pad. You want to make sure you have the wear indicator facing down. We'll go ahead and slide this right into position, put it in there. If it feels as though you need to hammer this in or force it in any way, that essentially means you didn't clean up your bracket enough. All right. Now we can start preparing the caliper. Let's use some more of that high temp grease. We're going to go right along the metal aspect of this caliper piston and then along the backside of both of these ears. This is going to help with vibration dampening and noise reduction. Once that's lubricated, let's go ahead and slide it into position. We're just going to go ahead and line it up with our caliper slider pins. Slide it on over those pads and get it in position. A little bit of red thread locker on our caliper slider bolts. We'll start both of these in, snug them up, and torque these to 26 foot-pounds. Now at this point, you just want to double check everything. Make sure everything's tight in the way that it needs to be, and of course, make sure that your flex hose isn't twisted in any way. Assuming it looks good, let's continue on to installing our wheel. Let's go ahead and get this lug nut off of here. Let's go ahead and get the wheel on here. We're going to start on all 5 of our lug nuts. We'll bottom them out, get the wheel back on the ground, and then we're going to torque each of these in a crisscross manner to 100 foot-pounds. Torqued. Okay, friends, we got one side of the brakes done. Now you're, of course, going to want to go over to the other side of the vehicle and do the same exact thing. After that, hop inside the passenger compartment, go ahead and pump up that brake pedal, get underneath the hood, double check your brake fluid, and then take it for a road test. Thanks for watching.